Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The wind tore over the prairie like it had a score to settle, and the people in the town of Red Hill kept their eyes low and their words sharp. Pearl Randal knew the sting of both. She stepped off the freight wagon that had carried her from Cheyenne, her worn boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. The sun lit the left side of her face, but she turned it away out of habit, letting her bonnet cast a shadow over the right. The scar ran from her temple to her jaw, faded, twisted, and a memory that never left. People stared. A little boy pointed. A woman clutched her husband's arm and whispered. Pearl walked past them, chin high. Red Hill was supposed to be a new start. She had taken a job at the boarding house on the edge of town, scrubbing floors, tending to the garden out back, quiet work that did not ask for her story. She had no kin left, no real friends. Just a scar, a suitcase, and a promise to herself that she would not let anyone else define her worth again. "Watch your step there," a voice said. She looked up. A tall man stood by the hitching post outside the saloon, rolling up the sleeves of a linen shirt. His hair was dark, tousled, and his eyes clear, steady, the color of creek water in early morning, met hers without flinching. Pearl blinked. Most men looked away. He did not. "You are new in town," he said. "Name is Nolan Zane." She hesitated. "Pearl Randal." He nodded, not asking more. Just tipped his hat and turned to tie off his horse. That should have been it. A simple hello. But as the days passed, Nolan Zane kept showing up. He brought firewood to the boarding house one evening when the sky cracked with thunder and the temperature dropped. He spoke little, worked fast, and left a gentle, "Evening, Miss Randal," behind him. Then he came again. And again. On the fourth visit, she stepped outside as he arranged the logs by the back porch. "You do not need to keep doing that," she said. "I know." She folded her arms. "Then why are you?" Nolan looked up at her, his jaw tight, his hands still dusty from the wood. "Because I want to." She did not know what to say to that. Inside the boarding house that night, Pearl stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her room. The scar was still there, angry and pale against her skin. Her face was not one you forgot. She had lived through a fire in Missouri 6 years ago, one set by raiders who thought her father's farm was hiding Union gold. Her parents had died that night. She had survived. Barely. She touched the scar and thought of Nolan's eyes. He came by again the next week, just after dawn, when the grass was still wet and the town was quiet. Pearl was out back hanging laundry. "Morning," he said. She turned, surprised. "You are early." "Cattle drive is heading out tomorrow," he said. "Might be gone a week." She nodded. "I wanted to say goodbye before I left." Pearl swallowed hard. "You are kind." Nolan stepped closer. "No, I am not. I just see you. That is all." She looked away, unsure how to answer that. "No one sees me," she said quietly. "I do," he said. "And I do not care about your scar." That made her chest twist. "Why?" she asked. "Because it is not what makes you beautiful." Pearl's hands trembled as she reached for the laundry line. She could not look at him. He stepped back, gave her space, and tipped his hat once more. "Be well, Pearl." Then he left. She did not sleep much that week. Pearl kept busy at the boarding house, but her thoughts stayed with him. She remembered the way he looked at her, like nothing about her face was broken. Like she was worth seeing. When he returned, dust-covered and tired, he walked straight to her. "I miss you," he said. Pearl's throat tightened. She had never had anyone say that to her before. "I kept thinking about your voice," he said. "And your eyes." She stepped back, overwhelmed. "Do not say things you do not mean." "I mean every word." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move. She did not. His fingers brushed her cheek, her unscarred side. Then, gently, he let his hand rest there, warm and steady. Her eyes filled with tears. "I am not broken," she whispered. No, he said. You are fire and steel. She leaned into his hand, just a little. And that was the first time in 6 years that she let someone touch her face. They sat on the back steps of the boarding house that night, talking until the stars came out. Nolan was 29, a former cavalry scout turned cattleman. He had no family left either. Just a ranch 2 miles out, and a dog named Flint who hated strangers and loved bacon. Pearl told him about the fire. About the nights she still dreamed of running through smoke. About the stairs. The cruel names. Nolan listened, never interrupting. When she finished, he said, You do not have to be alone anymore. Her breath caught. I do not know how to be anything else. Then I will wait, he said. Until you remember. Pearl looked at him, and for the first time in years she smiled. A real one. That night she dreamed of Nolan's hand on her cheek, and woke up with sunlight on her face. For once, she did not turn away from it. The first frost laid a thin silver film along the edges of the wooden water trough behind the boarding house. Pearl stepped around it, balancing a pail in each hand, her breath curling in front of her like smoke. The mornings had turned sharp, biting, and the scent of winter clung to the air. Nolan hadn't come by since the cattle drive ended. That had been a fortnight back. She didn't ask after him. Instead, she rose before the sun, swept the hearth, trimmed the lamps, and helped Mrs. Larkin bottle the last of the garden onions. She kept her hands busy, and her voice quiet, and hoped no one noticed the way her eyes flicked to the road each evening. That Tuesday, she found a tin box perched on the back step by the washbasin. Its lid had been hand-tooled with a simple horse design, rough, but careful. Inside, wrapped in an old bandana, lay a small carving of a prairie dog, no taller than her thumb. Its eyes had been inked in with soot, and its belly was smooth from being handled. She closed the box and held it against her chest for a long moment. That afternoon, Nolan returned. He waited beside the stables until she came out to salt the meat rack. His hat was low, but when he lifted his gaze, she saw something restless there, like a man who'd made a choice and was ready to live by it. I didn't mean to be gone so long, he said. Pearl didn't answer right away. She kept her hands moving, her fingers brushing the dry slabs of venison. I figured you changed your mind, she said finally. I didn't. She looked at him then, soft-eyed but wary. You left without a word. I was in Rawlins, he said. My neighbor's boy got trampled. We needed a doctor, and the train line's the quickest way. Pearl's jaw eased. Is he alive? He is. Walks stiff now, but he'll manage. She nodded, then took a breath. The carving. That was yours? He stepped closer. I made it on the trail. You once said you liked small things that fit in your hand. I remembered. Pearl blinked, her throat tightening. I didn't know if you'd want it, he added. But I wanted you to have something that was just yours. She looked away, toward the ridge. I'm not used to people remembering things I say. I remember all of it. She turned back to him. Why? Nolan scratched the back of his neck. Because when you speak, it sounds like truth. And I don't hear that often. They stood in silence, broken only by the distant call of a hawk circling over the ridge. Pearl shifted her weight, then said, You could have told me. About Rawlins. I didn't think you'd want to know my business, he said. Didn't want to crowd you. Her voice dropped. I don't mind being crowded. Not by you. Nolan reached up, slowly, and plucked a piece of straw from her sleeve. I've got a second bedroom in the ranch house, he said. It's empty now, but I've been thinking about what it might look like if it wasn't. Pearl's breath caught. I'm not asking for a decision, he said. Just letting you know I see a future if you do too. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry wheat and wood smoke across the yard. Pearl stepped forward close enough that the edge of her skirt brushed his boot. I don't know how to be someone's future, she said. You don't have to know, he answered. You just have to want it. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the prairie dog carving. It was warm from her body. She placed it in his hand. I want it. Nolan's hand closed around the figure, then opened again to return it to her. Then we'll build slow. No rush. No talk we don't mean. Pearl nodded, her lips trembling with something she didn't have a name for. He touched her wrist. Just that. Then backed away. Come to the ranch Sunday, he said. There's coffee on the stove by 6, and a porch that catches the morning sun. Pearl watched him walk away, dust rising behind his boots. She closed her fingers around the carving and didn't let go. The Sunday sky was pale and stretched wide, the kind of morning that made the world feel untouched. Pearl walked the 2 miles to Nolan's ranch with her shawl tied around her shoulders and a small tin of molasses biscuits wrapped in cloth beneath her arm. She'd risen before first light, hands unsteady, heart full of questions she hadn't dared ask herself until then. The gate to Nolan's land leaned slightly on its hinge, and the wheel ruts were packed with frost. A white dog with one torn ear watched her approach from the porch, tail thumping once against the boards before falling still. She stopped just short of the steps. I brought biscuits, she said. Nolan opened the door with a towel over his shoulder and a mug in his hand. Hope they go with boiled coffee. She followed him inside. The house was simple, 1 room wide, 2 deep. A cast iron stove warmed the air, and the scent of pine kindling clung to the floorboards. On a table by the window sat a half-finished saddlebag, its leather seams stitched with even, careful lines. Nolan poured her coffee without asking how she took it. You built this place yourself? She asked, sitting on the bench. My father started it before he passed. I finished it after the war. She rested her mug on her knee. It's good work. He set the tin aside and opened the cloth. These yours? My mother's recipe. I used to make them with her before harvest. Nolan nodded, chewing thoughtfully. They taste like autumn. Pearl looked down at her hands. I haven't cooked for anyone in years. You should, he said. You've got away with it. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the soft tick of the stove cooling. Outside, the wind had dropped, and a crow called once from the fence post, sharp and brief. Do you ever miss Missouri? He asked. Pearl's mouth tightened. Not the land. Not the past. But something? I miss the sound of frogs at night. The way the river shone when it flooded the banks. I miss my mother singing. Nolan nodded, his eyes not pressing. She took a breath. I don't sing anymore. You don't have to, he said. Pearl turned her face toward the window. Most men want the kind of woman who can host a supper and smile at their neighbors. I don't know if I can be that. I didn't ask for that. No. But people talk. They see me with you, and it'll start. I've fought worse men than gossips, he said. And come out standing. Pearl met his gaze. Why are you so sure about me? He leaned back, arms crossing loosely. Because I've seen what you carry. And how you carry it. She looked down, a flush rising to her cheek. You don't say much. Words are easy. Living true's harder. She stood and moved to the window, watching the wind stir the dry grass. The night my parents died, I stayed behind to grab my mother's quilt. That's why I got caught in the fire. He rose, slow, and walked to stand beside her. And you lived? I used to think that was a mistake. He didn't reach for her. He just stood close enough she could feel the heat off his arm. Do you still? He asked. Pearl's voice came soft, worn. Not today. He turned, just enough to face her. I want you to know something. She looked up. I've never seen your scar and thought less of you. But if you think it makes you less, then I'll spend my days showing you otherwise. Pearl's breath caught, not from fear, but from the way the words landed solid and sure. She didn't answer with a kiss or a tear. Instead, she reached out and slid her fingers into his, lacing them together, her palm rough against his calloused one. Then maybe I'll stay for supper, she said. His thumb traced the edge of her hand. "I've got stew on." "Nothing fancy." "Sounds right to me." They stood there, hands joined, as the sun shifted westward and the quiet settled around them like something earned. Pearl brushed flour from her hands and leaned back from the table, watching the dough rise beneath the towel. The kitchen was warmer than usual, filled with the scent of sage and stew broth, and the windows fogged at the corners. Nolan had gone out to check the fencing near the creek, but he'd left his gloves by the door and his coat unbuttoned, small signs he meant to return before dusk. She'd spent the last week at the ranch, rising with the light, kneading bread alongside chores. No one had spoken of her moving in, not outright, but her things now hung beside his, and her presence settled into the space like it had always been meant. The silence here was different. Not the kind that pressed in on her, but the kind that made room. She heard the gate creak and stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Nolan walked toward her, hat tucked under one arm, a canvas-wrapped bundle in the other. His boots were damp to the ankle and his shoulders dusted with fine grit from the wind. She noticed a crease between his brows that hadn't been there yesterday. "Fence hold?" she asked. "Mostly. One post gave at the edge. Might need a new beam before snowfall." She nodded and held the door for him. Inside, he set the bundle on the table and unwound the twine. Inside lay a folded dress, deep green, the fabric thick and plain but well made. "There's a harvest social in town next week," he said. "Thought you might want something warm, if you decide to come." Pearl stared at the dress, unsure what to say. Her old clothes were serviceable, but nothing she'd wear for dancing. She'd never been invited to a gathering since Cheyenne, and certainly not by someone who looked her in the eye as though she belonged. "I haven't danced since I was 17, she said. "You don't have to. Just thought it might be good to let folks see us together, proper." She traced the hem of the dress, her voice low. "That's a bold thing, Nolan." He sat across from her. "I'm not ashamed of you." Pearl's shoulders went stiff. "They'll stare. Let them. They'll learn." She folded the dress and set it aside carefully. "I don't own shoes for it. I'll ride into Laramie tomorrow," he said. "There's a cobbler who owes me a favor." Pearl looked at him for a long time, then reached across the table and rested her fingers on the back of his hand. He didn't startle. He simply turned his palm up and held her there. "I keep waiting for this to feel like something I'll lose," she said. "You won't," he answered. "Not unless you walk away. I'm not going anywhere." That night, she stood barefoot on the porch while he stripped the tack from his horse. The stars were sharp above the ridge, and the air held the first bite of coming snow. She watched him move in the half-dark, the rhythm of his hands steady, familiar. "I was thinking," she said. He looked over. "If I came to that social, I'd want to walk in beside you. Not behind. You would. And if folks talk, they will." She paused, then smiled faintly. "Then let them talk." He stepped beside her, slid his arm behind her back, and rested his forehead lightly to hers. "You make this place feel full," he said. Pearl closed her eyes. "I never thought I'd be chosen," she whispered. "You weren't chosen," he said. "You were seen." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hand slid into his, and they stood there until the cold pushed them inside, where the fire waited and the stew had begun to thicken. Nolan adjusted the clasp at the back of his collar, then set the small mirror down on the washstand. The suit jacket was old but clean, shoulders just a little tighter now, sleeves a touch short. He pulled it on anyway. Through the open kitchen door, he could hear Pearl humming low under her breath, the rustle of fabric as she moved. They hadn't spoken much since she tried on the green dress. She hadn't needed to. Her yes was in the way she stayed, in the careful folding of his shirts, in the way her hands moved without hesitation when they worked beside his. He didn't need louder proof than that. He stepped out onto the porch just as she came through the doorway, brushing a pine needle from her sleeve. The dress shaped to her like it had always belonged to her, and she tucked her hair behind one ear without trying to hide what couldn't be hidden. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the quiet between them filled with everything they hadn't said. "Ready?" he asked. She lifted the hem of her skirt slightly to keep it from the dirt. "I reckon." They rode into town side by side, dust rising behind the wagon wheels. The harvest social was already underway when they arrived, lanterns strung between fence posts, fiddles warming up beneath the open rafters of the barn. Children darted between hay bales, and someone had brought a cider barrel that steamed gently in the cooling air. Pearl stepped down before he could offer a hand, but she waited for him to fall into step beside her. Heads turned. A few whispers passed near the fence line, but she didn't shrink from them. Her chin stayed steady, her gaze clear. When she reached for Nolan's arm, she rested her hand there like she'd done it 1,000 times. Inside the barn, the music started up proper Rio first, fast and bright. Nolan led her to the edge of the floor, letting her decide. She watched the dancers for a long moment. "I don't know the new steps," she said. "Then we'll keep to the old ones," he said. "They've lasted this long for a reason." They danced 2 songs, slow and careful, her hand tight in his. She missed a turn once and laughed softly, the sound catching in his chest like something he hadn't known he'd been waiting to hear. Afterward, they stepped outside to catch their breath. The night had cooled and the stars hung low. A group of ranch hands were stacking wood by the fire pit, and somewhere behind them, a couple argued in hushed tones. Pearl leaned against the rail, watching the glow from the barn windows flicker against the grass. "You remember what you said about not knowing how to be someone's future?" Nolan said, his voice low. She turned to him. "I remember. I think you figured it out." Pearl looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "I think I just needed someone who didn't expect me to be anything but what I am." He stepped closer. "I never wanted anything else." She reached up and touched the collar of his jacket, smoothing it down. "Then let's not waste any more time." By the time they left, the music had softened and the lanterns burned low. They rode back without speaking much, her head resting lightly against his shoulder, the road ahead lit by the moon and the steady clip of the horses' hooves. The following morning, Nolan hitched the wagon and drove north, past the ridge, to Reverend Turnley's homestead. They waited until Sunday, kept it small, just the Reverend, his wife, and a neighbor to witness. Pearl wore a wool shawl over her dress, and Nolan smoothed her veil back with hands that didn't shake. They exchanged vows beside the stove while snow began to fall outside. No rings, only words. But they meant them. Afterward, they returned to the ranch together. She unpacked the last of her things without ceremony. He built a shelf near the window for her books. She mended the curtains. He patched the roof. They found a rhythm in the weeks that followed. She baked on Fridays, and he took the wagon into town each second Thursday. She sat on the porch at dusk with her sewing, and he carved small animals from scrap wood to leave on the windowsill. They didn't name the dog again, Flint was enough. One morning in March, Pearl stood by the stove stirring oats, and Nolan came in from the barn with a letter in his hand. It was from Laramie and offered to buy 3 dozen head at fair price. He set it down beside her bowl. "You ever think of what it'd be like to start fresh somewhere else?" he asked. "Only if you're there," she said. But they stayed. The land was hard, and the work long, but the house held warmth now, and their names were known without pity. Pearl joined the winter quilting circle, and Nolan helped mend the school roof in spring. They never had much, but what they had was theirs. Years later, when neighbors spoke of them, it was always with the same note in their voices, like they were remembering something solid, something weathered and good. And in the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the wind died down, Pearl would sit beside Nolan on the porch, her hand in his, and watch the light fall across the hills. She never turned her face from it again.